All right, we're all ready to go. Can you guys hear us on Zoom okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Can you hear fine?
Thank you. We're all set to start.
Okay. In that case, we'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting portion of the February 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Historic Review Board to order. First, we will ask if there are any public comments not related to items on the agenda this evening.
No, none.
Okay. Hearing that there are no public comments, we'll now move into the public hearing portion of the agenda. There are 2 public hearings on land use applications scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matters before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Historic Review Board are to be unbiased. Before the start of each hearing, I will ask the Historic Review Board members whether they have had any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the Historic Review Board members have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any Historic Review Board member about their disclosures. The staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Historic Review Board will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedures steps are shown on the Historic Review Board website. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are any others in the audience who would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please also state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written materials while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If you intend for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to city staff while the record is still open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or the Land Use Board of Appeals or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now, we will open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA-21-00063 and HR 21-28. Historic review for partition and reduction to designated site boundary reduction in the size of the Frederick White House Historic Site at 716 10th Street. I'll now ask each Historic Review Board member if they've had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare, and if they visited the site and have noted any material information. Board Member Edgar.
I have gone to the site. I've looked it over. I have no conflicts of interest or any contact with the people.
Thank you. Board Member Ferry.
I visited the site. I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. Board Member Stobie.
I have no conflicts of interest, no ex parte contact, and yes, I have visited the site.
Thank you. Board Member Belknap.
I have visited the site. I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. And I've also visited the site and have had no ex parte contacts and do not have any conflicts. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the Historic Review Board members about these disclosures? Okay. Hearing none, we'll turn it back over to city staff for the report.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. Kelly Reed, planner. This is HR 21-28, the request for reduction to designated site boundary. The site's in the McLoughlin Conservation District on a corner lot. You're testing this remote. Thank you, Lisa. So it's at the corner of 10th and Jefferson Street. There is, it's in the R35 zone. So that zone allows for single family uses as well as duplexes and attached single family or townhomes. This property has two units on it and they are attached. So it's essentially a duplex. With one of the homes being built in 1892, that's the designated structure. And then the adjoining unit was built sometime in the early 1950s, before the adoption of city's zoning code. So a duplex is a permitted use in this zone, and attached single family would be allowed to. The difference between those two is that a duplex is two units on one parcel, and the attached single family would be each unit is on its own parcel with a shared, at the property line, they share a wall. So I say that because the applicant has proposed to partition the lot to separate it into two parcels that would then create a shared wall at that new property line. And with that, the request to you today is to reduce the size of the the designated site boundary from being on the entire parcel to only being on the parcel 1, which is the parcel that the 1892 Italian historic home is on. So that's the Frederick White House shown here. The inventory form that's in your agenda packet talks about the later addition that is now a kind of a second unit being an L as described in the inventory form. And there's not a lot of detail given about that part of the structure in the inventory form. So, you know, this analysis kind of provides some of that description, but there's not much that we know, I think, about that addition to the structure. So you can see the partition plan here, where the proposed lot line would be placed, right where the breezeway is that separates, the breezeway is within the addition. So you can see where, I don't know if no, that doesn't work. you can see where the 2-story or 1.5-story structure ends, and then there's the 1-story addition. So that's all part of the addition, the later part of the structure. The proposed line would be drawn at a breezeway, so it wouldn't be drawn at the back wall of the 1892 structure, but further back. So the Parcel 2 would contain the breezeway covered area along with the rest of that unit, which is 622 square feet. There's also a detached garage at the back of the property and a large tree. And those, so those would remain on Parcel 2. And the garage is not, it doesn't have any historic significance. The applicant is also, so the partition application is going before the Planning Commission next month. And that's going to the Planning Commission because there's also a variance that's required for the lot depth. These proposed lot sizes meet the minimum lot size for this zone for single-family attached housing, but they do not meet the lot depth because it's a narrow lot, and that Parcel 2 would only have a 50-foot depth. So the Planning Commission will be reviewing this proposal, not for the historic boundary reduction, but for the variance to lot depth and for the partition itself, just to clarify. If the Historic Review Board approves the boundary reduction, then the designation of the property would fall only on Parcel 1, and there would be no designation on Parcel 2. Parcel 2 would still remain within the McLoughlin Conservation District, however. If the board denies the request to reduce the boundary, the partition can still move forward with the variance, so the Planning Commission could approve the partition and the variance, and the designation, the historic designation, would remain on Parcel 1 and Parcel 2 moving forward, which means any exterior alterations to the house on Parcel 2 would be subject to historic review, as they are today. So the 1950s addition here, it is compatible with the historic structure. You know, it's a simple design. It's modestly sized. It's shorter than the house, does not overpower it. Has kind of wood siding, similar siding. So it's compatible. But it has minimal historic significance, if any. It has, you know, typical composition roof, vinyl windows. It's a very rectangular, simple design. Sometimes additions to historic structures can acquire significance in their own right. That's actually part of our design guidelines for alterations, talks about additions being potentially significant in their own right, even if they were not part of the original volume of the structure. In this case, staff doesn't believe that the addition has really acquired any significance. Furthermore, I want to talk about the historic review threshold for Parcel 2. So if that parcel is removed from the designated site boundary, it will remain in the McLoughlin Conservation District, and it will be subject to the new construction review thresholds. So exterior alterations could be done without historic review. That building could get brand new, you know, vinyl siding. It could get a small addition. You could build a shed behind it. Could, change the front door, make lots of alterations to the exterior without any historic regulation. What would still be regulated are the additions greater than 30%. So for a 622 square foot building, your 30% addition would be approximately 187 square feet. So any new construction on that parcel 2 that exceeds 187 square feet would come to the board for review. So, if you were to add a second story to that building or add a large, a bedroom and a bathroom or something to it, that would likely be greater than 187 square feet and would likely come to the board for review to make sure that that new construction is compatible. Demolition of either of the structures, so of unit 2 as shown on the map there, or of the garage, would not be reviewed by the board. So by removing this structure from the designated boundary, the board would be allowing demolition of it without any historic review. Now, the portion, on the other side of the breezeway, that portion of it that would remain on parcel 1, that could not be demolished without board review. The McLoughlin Neighborhood Association submitted a public comment earlier today. I did email it to the board, so hopefully everyone saw it. If you did not, I can make sure you get a copy right now, or this hearing could be continued if necessary. But the gist of the comment, I think I'm trying to characterize it properly here, with some of the key quotes from it. The McLoughlin Neighborhood Association does not support the request because the structures are physically connected, and of course, because of that, they're very proximate to each other. And the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association says that even if the historic overlay is reduced, the buildings will remain intimately and practically connected. They will continue to be closely associated with each other. This means that future exterior alterations to one building have the potential to substantially impact the other building, that the HRB should retain its control over all such future exterior alteration proposals. So the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association is absolutely correct that the exterior alterations would be allowed without board review, and the board would not have control over any of those potential alterations aside from the new construction threshold. So I guess I'll answer questions about this comment if you have any. But I think that there are findings to support approving the request, and we can make findings as well to support denying the request based on what McLoughlin Neighborhood Association has provided. If the board wants to go in that direction, that would be absolutely reasonable, and we could write findings. We would just have to come back to review those findings, so we'd have to have a continuance. So the staff's recommendation, despite the public comment, staff's recommendation remains that the boundary could be reduced to be limited to just parcel 1, and that it would provide clarity to both property owners, and that the addition to the house, because it is not, hasn't achieved or gained historic significance in its own right, it does not necessarily need to be protected in the same way that the historic home needs to be protected. So here's Exhibit B, that if you approve this request, this would represent what the historic designated site boundary would be. And the options tonight for the board are to approve the proposal, to continue to a date certain, or to deny the proposal, provide revised findings, and that's where we would come back for another hearing to write and then adopt those final findings. Any questions?
It says in the, let's see, I think this is from the building division, but it says that there needs to be a firewall that's built if the two buildings are separated. Is that on the historic structure or the units? Is it on parcel 2 or parcel 1?
So it would be at the property line.
So that would be on the historic structure then, or on the addition on the historic structure.
It would be right where that yellow line is.
Yeah, so it looks like that's the breezeway, and so that's on the side of the parcel 1, right?
Well, that's the property line, so it would kind of be, I mean, I suppose that wall would, like the line would technically be right next to that wall. So yeah, I guess you could say it would be on parcel 1, but it would be on the, that addition part of the structure. So, and I believe what that would entail would be, adding some thicker drywall to that shared wall.
Right. So it's not like a big intrusive sort of addition
Correct.
onto that. And then I guess, is it possible to bisect those buildings? I mean,
is it possible to what?
Bisect them, like take them apart and have them not be connected anymore? I think that would remove a lot of the issue with the changes to the parcel 2 structure. I mean, I don't know. That's just I don't know what that would entail.
I mean, I guess I think the applicant is here,
right.
So maybe that's a question they could address.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question I would like, you're saying that this is going to be heard by the Planning Commission at their next meeting?
So they are going to review the partition and the variance to lot depth. They're not going to really be discussing the historic aspect of it.
Okay, but are they, if they rule to allow for this division, that is totally independent of what we do?
Correct, yes. So they could approve the partition, and the historic overlay, boundary would remain as it is today. So even though there's now a line, an additional property line, the boundary, if the board denied it or if they weren't even asking for this review, then the historic boundary would remain on both parcels.
But they would be able to effectively sell the separated unit as a separate dwelling unit, property and all.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, with the ruling by the Planning Commission.
Yes.
So what we're really determining is whether we feel that it's in the best interest of historic preservation to retain the historic designation over the property so as that nothing happens to the separated unit that detracts from the primary unit of historic designation.
Yeah, so when the historic structures in the city were kind of identified in the 1980s.
Yes.
And then that historic overlay was created. The structures were identified, and then so really we designated the structures, but the way it was applied is to whatever parcel that property was on. The entire parcel got, designated.
Yes.
So the designation boundary line is the parcel lines. The designated structure is the structure, and that's kind of why, we care about the whole site, but if something's kind of at the back of the property separated from the historic structure, then, it might not, it might have less, the board might have less concern about it. Same way that, the structure is what's designated, and, every little bush and tree on the property is not necessarily part of that. So in this case, the property can be divided. The question that you're answering tonight is whether the historic protections of the designated boundary should be reduced to just be that original historic structure, or whether it should continue to encompass both parcels, including that newer structure.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay.
Right. If there's no other questions for staff, then we'll move into the public testimony. As a reminder, we'll invite the applicant up first, and they'll have up to 15 minutes to describe their application. Then representatives of recognized neighborhood associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will have up to 5 minutes. Individuals up to 3 minutes, and then the applicant will have up to 5 minutes for a rebuttal. So we'll go ahead and invite the applicant to speak. Again, you have 15 minutes, though you don't need to use it all. If you could state your name and place of residence, please.
Yes, my name is Rick Gibbons. I live in Oregon City. I'm a planning consultant, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Otto, the owner of the property. I don't believe she's present tonight, so I'll do my best to give you the information I can. Really don't have a lot to add to what Kelly mentioned in the presentation. Essentially, as you can see, the structure that was added on 600 some odd square feet is separated by a breezeway, but it also appears that there was an addition to the original historic house that extended that back portion. And those two must have been done at the same time. It looks as though the breezeway ties together with some newer construction that was done in the 50s. And the original historic structure is the front part of that building. This application came about when for the pre-app was discussed to staff. The staff suggested it might be a good idea to do this. So just to make clear that the smaller structure, which is not historic in character itself, would not be subject to historic review for every little change that might come along. As Kelly noted, any significant change, there's an increase in the floor plan by more than 187 square feet, which is about a single car garage or something like that, would require review. So it's not as if the board would be given all control over major changes to the property. No major changes are proposed. This is simply a proposal to allow the property to be divided along the shared property line, or shared wall, and to allow each unit to be owned individually. The idea is to increase owner occupancy in the area, rather than having a rental there. Private ownership will be an asset to the neighborhood. We're just trying to get this into a situation where it's clear that you know, if you want to paint the house or whatever, you know, that its own applicant, own,
Mr. Givens,
yes.
we're having difficulty hearing you in here. Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Well, let me get a little closer to the microphone. Does that help? Are you hearing me better?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see. Where was I then? I thought I had a lot more intelligent to say. As noted, this goes to the Planning Commission next for consideration of the variance and the partition. The two applications are really totally separate. If the Planning Commission denies the application for either the variance or the partition, then we would be in a situation as we are today, in a duplex in the R 2.5 zone. If we're allowed to do the partition, then we would proceed to record the final plat, and the separate rental unit on the back would then become something available for sale for our occupancy. No proposal at this time to change anything. There was a question about dividing the structures, which would essentially be taking the roof off of the breezeway. We haven't investigated that. I don't know what would be required. I don't have any idea what the structural members are of the roof there. It might be possible to do, but that's not something that Ms. Oshiro is planning. She simply wants to get this into a situation where each unit can be sold separately. I think that concludes my remarks for now. I'm glad to answer questions.
All right, thank you. Do any of the board members have any questions for the applicant?
I'm glad to my time for rebuttal and if there's additional testimony.
Okay, it sounds like we do not have any questions. All right. If no questions, then we'll move on to other public testimony. Do we have any other public comments on this application?
I believe we do have one on Zoom.
Is that you, Jesse?
Yes, Chair Blythe, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. And if I assume you're representing the neighborhood association, so you'll have up to 5 minutes.
That's correct. Thank you. Shall I proceed?
Yes, please.
All right. Chair and board members, thank you for your time this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to address you on this issue. A couple of preliminary matters. As some of you know, and some of you don't, board member Belknap and I are married, and I just wanted to clarify so that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that she and I have not discussed this application at all. There's been a wall between us on this issue. So, and she received the M&A's comments at the same time that the rest of you did, not any earlier. Second, I've worked professionally with Mr. Givens before, and I have nothing but respect for him. He's an advocate for his clients, and nothing I'm about to say or that we've submitted in our comments is in any way meant to denigrate him. He's a consummate professional. That said, I want to riff off of something that board member Edgar pointed out and clarified, which is that this application before the HRB is completely separate from the application before the Planning Commission, and nothing you do here, whether you say yes or no to the application, is going to affect what the Planning Commission does or can do. You don't have the ability to limit the Planning Commission's range of alternatives. You're really just here to consider the historic impact under OCMC 17.40. And we've addressed those factors in our written comments. I want to raise a hypothetical here to illustrate the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association's main concern about this application, which is that if the HRB grants the application, it will ultimately forever lose control over what happens on the Partition site where the addition is in the back of the current building. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, it will absolutely lose control. So, and the hypothetical is this. Imagine that you approve this application and have two separate legal lots of record once it gets through the Planning Commission. So the historic structure, the main historic structure is still covered by HRB policies and the historic code, but the addition is not. As Ms. Reed pointed out, I believe she said the addition is 622 square feet, and that's a dwelling unit. That's quite small, and it's imminently foreseeable that what will happen after this partition is that will get demolished. That 622 square foot, essentially ADU, will get demolished, and there'll be an application for new construction, which will certainly be much, much larger, probably a 2-story structure. Now, the HRB would have design input over that new structure, but once it's built, the HRB would never, ever, ever again get to have any input about alterations to that new structure. That is, unless that owner applied for some permit to increase the square foot of that new building by over 30%, which would trigger design review again. But it's extremely unlikely that a new big structure, new construction, would ultimately then ask for an additional 30% in the future to be added on. And I raise this hypothetical to point out the ultimate conclusion. If you say yes to this application, the HRB will lose control over part of what it now has control over within the geographic boundaries of the McLoughlin Conservation District. And I respectfully submit that the HRB should be interested in keeping control as much as it can over construction and exterior alterations within the district and not giving it up. There's simply nothing to be gained at all. There's only downside, potential downside in the future if the application is granted. And I just want to raise a concern that the neighborhood association has about this wall that's being proposed to be built between the two. For talking purposes, I'll call them separate structures, even though they're connected in one structure. What is this wall going to look like? I know you just had a work session about design guidelines, and I think the word wall is mentioned about 200 times in that document, but there's nothing in this application that says what that wall would look like or whether it would be compatible with historic structure. I don't know how much time I have because I didn't set myself.
There's about 10 seconds.
Okay. I'll just conclude and say I urge you to read the written comments, but you can deny this application without impacting in any way what the Planning Commission is doing. So there's really there's no positive affirmative reason to grant it, and there's only downside from granting it. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, muted here. Thanks, Jesse. Do we have any other public comments? Okay. Hearing none, I guess we'll go back to the applicant. If you have any rebuttal testimony.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments. Again, for the record, Rick Givens.
Rick, do you mind trying to slow down a little bit and speak loudly so we can hear you better this time, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
I will do so. Regarding the demolition of the structure and building a new one, I think that's a pretty big assumption that is not necessarily going to happen. But if it were to happen, you would have input on the design of the new structure. That's a significant amount of input regarding any potential change to the neighborhood in terms of what that structure would look like. Later on, if someone wanted to do something to that structure, it is true that unless it exceeded the threshold, then you would not have a review of that structure modification. But is that any different than any other lot in the neighborhood? Essentially, if that did happen, as Mr. Busch suggested, these would be then separate structures, and you have no control over other structures in the area that are not historic in character. So I think that's perhaps raising an objection that is not necessarily real, because there is a desire for small, affordable ownership parcels in Oregon City, as you know, through what you were just discussing in your work session about middle housing. There's going to be more of that proposed. This is in character with that. So there's nothing happening here as a part of this request to approve this, other than to limit the historic designation to the historic structure. Other than that, it would be just like any other lot in the McLoughlin district, except that you would get say over the increase in size of the structure if it does happen. Regarding the firewall, I believe that's simply a matter of providing interior change to the sheetrock. Todd Eisel was on here. I'm sure you know far more about that than I would, but I don't think there's any necessity to make a structural change to the exterior. There aren't any openings on that wall on that side, but I think everything would be interior changes. Otherwise, if they did have to make changes to it, I think they would remove siding, make whatever changes necessary, and put it back. There wouldn't be any permanent change to the structure. I guess I take exception to the use of only downside. I think it's more a case of HRB has control over this property because of the historic nature of the existing house on the property, not because of anything to do with this accessory unit in the back. It is a limitation on the use of the property and on the owner's rights to the property to have that designation. And she certainly understands the reason why it's there, but should there be a limitation on a part of the property that is not historic in character, would you expect, if you were buying a lot in the McLoughlin district, that you're going to, you're subject to certain requirements of the structure you built, but you aren't necessarily limited to the degree that a property that has an historic structure on it. And so I don't think that's a downside. I think it's just returning the property to the same degree of limitation as everything else in the McLoughlin district that doesn't have a historic structure on it. It seems to me like the dividing line there is pretty clear. There's a very clear demarcation between the structures, and actually you've got a buffer of non-original historic addition on the historic structure that separates it from the new lot line by probably 15 feet anyway. So I think that's all I have to add at this point. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you. Do any board members have any questions for the applicant? Okay, hearing none, we'll move into board deliberations. So I think going back to the staff presentation, I think we have a couple of options this evening. One, to follow the staff's initial recommendations to approve the application with conditions. Two was to, if you have that, to continue the hearing to a date certain, in which case we would leave the public record open to additional comments or rebuttal to the kind of the late comments we received today from the neighborhood association, or to potentially revise findings and adopt those and deny the proposal. I guess maybe we'll go around the board for any kind of initial thoughts on the direction we might want to take here. Board Member Edgar.
At this point, one of the things that I remember from some of the training that I took on historic preservation and doing things correctly is that I would not build a non-compatible structure next to a important critical structure. And when they're connected by a roof and physical structure, I find it very difficult to separate the two of them. And I would, I lean on option number 3. This does not mean in any way that I'm against the going to the Planning Commission, and whatever happens there, happens there. But I think I agree with the presentation of the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association in saying that it is in our best interest to ensure that a connecting structure that is connected by roof be still under the auspices and of the Historic Review Board. If it was separated completely, then that would be another thing. But right now, they are intertied and inseparable, and therefore I move for denial. I believe that that's the correct approach.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Ferry, your thoughts?
I do think it's silly to keep really strict historic regulations on a building that is not a historic structure. But I do find that since these buildings are not separate, since they are together, that it might be in our best interest to keep the historic protections on the entire lot of the property while the buildings do remain attached. I agree that if they were completely separate, this would be a completely different conversation, because I don't necessarily think that additional structure should be subject to any stricter regulations than, any other non-historic property. But given the fact that they are connected, I find it hard to separate them visually.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Stobie?
I'll keep mine brief by agreeing with both board members that have spoken. I find it hard to separate the two, and therefore I would be in favor of number 3.
Board Member Belknap?
I also agree with the reasons that my fellow board members have given for going with option number 3. Just because they are attached, I think the potential for some very conflicting design choices to be made were we to give up historic designation of this, separated property should it become separated. I think it's very possible and could really diminish the the value and, of the other property. So I think we should go with option number 3.
Okay. And then I guess from my perspective, I think I understand why the applicant, wants to do what they want to do. And I think that the application to the Planning Commission is potentially, worthy on its own from the sense of splitting the lot lines and making the separate ownership possible. I think that makes sense, and I can see why they would want to do that. I also would echo Board Member Ferry's comments about not wanting to be overly burdensome or too heavy-handed with our review process on the second structure that, really isn't contributing. However, I think I do agree with the rest of the board also in that it's difficult in this case to separate the two structures the way they're constructed. So I guess when I think back to some of the other similar applications we've had in reducing the size of the historic designation on a parcel, in some cases we've had designated structures that have had really large properties or have had multiple lots, and then we've agreed to reduce the size of the designation and split those extra lots off so that other structures can be constructed. But those were sort of multiple lot type situations where the structures were totally independent. I think you could also maybe make an argument that there is a case where you could have a shared wall or a touching wall, but that the two structures would be independent in both style, construction, materials, and otherwise more separated than what kind of is in this case. In this case, I kind of think that the addition to the historic structure and the part that would be separated, were designed together, constructed together, use same materials. So it's hard to say that you can make modifications to the second without having an impact on the primary structure. So I think that I agree with the rest of the board that I would probably support going with option number 3, although I don't think that it's shutting the door that in the future it's not possible to separate these if the applicant was select to do that. I think, if there were a case where someone, purchased the second portion and wanted to do an addition and make more, I guess, modifications that make that more of an independent structure from the first, I could see maybe a case where you could make that argument. But today, as it's constructed, I would probably support number 3. And I actually think that in some ways that's more beneficial to the owner of the first structure, in the sense that if that other is going to be so tightly tied to the historic home, they would maybe not want someone who's a separate buyer to go be able to make some, large modifications to that second structure without, that would have an adverse impact on the historic home. So those are my thoughts there. So Kelly, I guess if we did want to pursue option 3 there, for you, we would want to kind of try to distill that down into some kind of discrete findings that we can adopt as a board.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I'm happy to go back and write findings, bring them back. I do think that you all have provided the findings needed here. So if you, I think it's up to you. So if you want to see what you've said in writing before you adopt it, then we can come back. But if you are comfortable in having me kind of write down what I've heard as the findings for a denial and just issue the decision after tonight, then I think we could do that. So it's your preference.
Okay. And then I guess, Rick, I see that your hand's been raised. I can take procedural questions but not additional testimony at this point.
Chair Bly, I would, I just want to make sure that we dot the i's and cross the t's correctly in a denial that that is done in such a way that that there is no problems or associated with it. If I would be willing to move for denial, and then, but it comes back to entrusting staff to come up with the words, and much of that is recorded, so she could come up with those words, and then we move ahead without any delay or reprocessing it becomes another obligation. We just move on if we can do that. And that's up to staff and you. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm willing to make a motion to approve denial.
May I speak on the procedures?
Yes, but go ahead. Yeah, if you have a procedural question, go ahead.
Yes. I would ask that you consider continuing this to a further date before you make a decision. Pretty apparent that you have one issue, and that's the fact the structures are joined. And we didn't receive the testimony from the Neighborhood Association until Kelly emailed it to me after I completed my testimony. So I have no idea that was coming, and I did not have the opportunity to discuss with my client whether or not she would be interested in splitting the unit. It seems as though we should be given the opportunity to get that information to you before you make your decision. I understand the comments you made. I'm not trying to sway you on those, but I would ask that you give us the opportunity to at least talk to the client, determine whether taking the roof off to the breezeway is a reasonable thing to do.
Okay, so I think, I guess given that those comments were kind of late and you didn't get a good opportunity to prepare to address those, I think we could draft kind of our draft findings with our, leave the public record open and continue this application to a date certain to next month. If you'd like to respond, or have more time to prepare a better, more mature response to those comments.
And in fact, I'll just add that since a continuance was just requested and this is the first evidentiary hearing, we are required to grant a continuance.
Chair Blythe, may I respond briefly?
Again, trying to keep it procedural. I know we kind of are pushing that boundary a little bit already, but yeah.
I'll keep my comments confined to what Mr. Gibbons just said. And with respect to him, he did appear before the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association some months ago before the application was submitted. And the issue of the breezeway connection was absolutely raised and discussed at length at that meeting. So this was not a surprise to the applicant today, though I realize the formal comments were submitted late in the process, and for that I do apologize. But to the extent there was non-procedural questions and testimony in what Mr. Gibbons just said, the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association objects to that. We would, I think the request for a continuance is untimely since the hearing had been closed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. I guess my perspective is that I think it's clear that the board is leaning in the direction of denial, but I don't see any harm in granting the continuance if the applicant or the public would like to submit additional testimony before our next meeting, and we'll plan on making a final decision next meeting if that's acceptable to the rest of the board.
I believe that if as long as the testimony has not been brought to an end, the applicant has the full right to ask for a continuance, and had we closed all debate or all discussion, that would not be possible, but under these conditions, they have that right.
And thanks, Paul. So Kelly, the next meeting, is it the 22nd or the 29th?
It is March 22nd.
Okay. So in that case, I guess we would be ready for a motion to continue this application to a date certain of March 22nd.
I move for continuance to a certain date of March 22nd.
I'll second that.
Board Member Belknap,
Aye.
Board Member Ferry,
Aye.
Board Member Stobie,
Aye.
Board Member Edgar,
Aye.
Chair Blythe.
Aye. Okay, so the application is continued until next month. The public record is still open on this application for additional comment. Kelly, maybe we can try to kind of draft what our preliminary findings are between then too, so that we can make a clear decision next month.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Okay. Switching between files here. So we will now move on to item number 4 on the agenda and open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA-21-00063 and HR 21-00063, historic review for solar panel installation on street facing roof planes on a designated structure in the McLoughlin Conservation District, the Otto and Luelle Erickson house. I'll again ask each historic review board member if they've had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statements to declare, and if they visited the site and have any information to add to the record. Board Member Edgar.
Yes, I went to the site again yesterday, looked around, walked around, took views of it from a lot of different perspectives. I just wanted to review it, and while I was there, my wife was sitting in a car came up and parked, and we were kind of blocking their way, and it ended up being the applicant who owns the house. I talked to them briefly, nothing about anything, and I don't feel I have any conflicts of interest.
Thank you. Board Member Ferry.
I visited the site. I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. Board Member Stobie.
I have no conflicts of interest, no ex parte contact, and I have visited the site.
Thank you. Board Member Belknap.
I have visited the site. I have no ex parte contact and no conflicts of interest.
Thank you. And I've also visited the site. I've had no ex parte contacts and have no conflicts. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the historic review board members about these disclosures? Okay, hearing none, we'll turn it over to staff for the report. If there's any, do we have any updates from last meeting or?
Thank you, Chair Blythe. The applicant requested a further continuance for this one. They needed more time to prepare the information that you had requested last hearing. So we did, unfortunately, we didn't get in writing a 120-day extension. the board can continue it to March 22nd. And we'll do our best to get a 120 extension in the meantime. I don't think that there was any reluctance on the applicant's part to do that. I think it is just overlooked.
Okay. Is staff's recommendation then that should we proceed with the continuance at risk, knowing that the 120, going beyond next meeting would start to put that 120 days time limit in kind of jeopardy there, or?
I'm pulling up the 120 date right now just to double check. All right. So the current 120-day deadline is April 29th. So there would be enough. There should be enough time for an appeal hearing in the month of April if necessary. And so, yes, staff's recommendation would be to continue to March 22nd.
I move that we extend a continuance on GLUA-21-00063 to a certain date of March 22nd. Thank you.
I second that.
Board Member Belknap?
Aye.
Board Member Stobie?
Aye.
Board Member Ferry?
Aye.
Board Member Edgar?
Aye.
Chair Blythe?
Aye. Very good. So that concludes the public hearing portion of the agenda. We'll now move into other business. The first item being design advice for rear addition to Frank and Annie Busch house at 204 Jefferson Street. And just since we're kind of still at the beginning of a year, just to be clear for anybody that's, the newer members of the board, this is not a public hearing, just an informal design advice item. So we won't use the normal, public testimony type rules that we use for procedure.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. We got a request for design advice for a rear addition onto the Frank and Annie Busch house at 204 Jefferson Street in the McLoughlin Conservation District. This is a designated structure, and I will just remind you that design advice is this will become part of the record if a historic review application is submitted, and that design advice comments are from individual board members. So if you're providing advice, it's from yourself as an individual and not as a board. Also, design advice is non-binding on the board members. And the applicant is welcome to come up. Sure. I think that microphone works. We'll find out.
Well, I think Todd is here as well, our architect.
Yeah.
More for him.
And I will just give a very quick explanation, then I'll let you take it from there. And then the board can provide some feedback after you've kind of described your project. So here's a current picture of the side of the house. Unfortunately, the other pictures are with the next applicant. application, item, but there's a site plan showing where the rear addition would go. It's an odd-shaped lot, but the house is kind of placed well above the street, so there would be portions of this that would be visible, I believe, from the street. And there would be there would be demolition of a wall, of the rear wall involved in this, and then kind of replacement of that. So it's a 2-story addition. The area that is shown with siding and with detail is the new portion. And then you can see the existing volume of the house would remain unchanged, except for that very back portion. So if you look at the rear elevation, you can see that the new addition is kind of a little shorter in height than the rest of the home. And I think, I don't have, there's nothing that stands out to me as staff to comment on at the moment, but I will let the applicant go ahead and tell you a little bit more. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Luelle. So currently, if you look at the right side elevation, the kitchen, the back portion of the house, and, is that on? Oh, there we go, sorry. And so we are hoping extend the back wall of the kitchen by 4 feet. And the biggest thing is just to be able to pop a bathroom upstairs above the kitchen. We currently only have a very small bathroom with a clawfoot tub, which we don't want to change because that bathroom is so narrow. There's actually no real place to shower or to put a shower. And we would like to age in this house. And so we were just hoping that we could put in a small bathroom above like the center of the kitchen. So you won't actually see it. If you look at the rear elevation, it's narrower above the kitchen. So, and that of course requires popping the roof up above. And that might also help. We have problems with mold up in the current structure. When we bought the property earlier in March, and we do know that we have mold issues up there. There's not enough ventilation upstairs, and we are hoping to mitigate that as well as part of this project. And I think the kitchen area is not built on the same foundation as the main house. There's a huge thick-walled foundation, on a stone foundation on the main house, on the front. On the back, we're not quite sure what's underneath there. So that would be, we would, we're having a geotechnical engineer and everything else look at that and make sure that we're all, that would be secure. I don't know, I think Todd Iselin is here if he has any other suggestions or questions.
I am, and I intended to be there and showed up at the wrong City Hall council chamber, so I apologize for that. So I'm joining you by Zoom tonight. Thank you, Will, for giving a great introduction. The house is a beautiful home. It's very well restored and beautiful in a lot of different ways, and it's on an oversized site, which makes it very prominent. We don't want to take away from the historic home. The addition at the back was built, I'm guessing, around 1910. It was poorly built. It has no foundation. So it seemed like the logical place to expand to get a real bathroom up there. Right now, as Will said, it's a very small bathroom that's really not proportional to the home. The kitchen is also a little tight. So we're going to be expanding 4 feet out is what we're proposing. Replacing the poorly built addition with a new addition that would be compatible with siding to match the existing. We would have new wood windows, roofing that would match existing. We would treat the window trim differently to differentiate it. And at the rear porch, we would not have any of the gingerbread that the front porch does. So it is distinct as an addition to somebody that is really knowledgeable. But we want it to blend and appear to be compatible and complementary to the home. So that's been our goal with this design. As Will alluded to, we also are in a geohazard overlay area, so we do have to go through that process, and we're going to be doing that simultaneous with the HR application. So I guess the advice we're looking for, is this an appropriate approach? And also the fact that we are going to be putting a foundation in, we will not be preserving as much of the historic fabric as we would normally try to do on a house like this. We will preserve the entire structure of the original home, but that back addition, like I said, it's going to be more costly to try to save what we can and remodel it, and we'll have a better product at the end of the day if we start from scratch back there, but use siding and everything that will match the existing. So I'd like any advice that you might have or direction from the board. Appreciate that.
I would make a couple comments, but I would love to see the windows in the back have more of a look and feel of the regular historic windows that are on the house. Even proportionally, the upstairs additional area where the bathroom is, if there was a way that they could be more proportionally correct as to the dimensional size and imagery of the windows in the regular house, that would be significantly preferable. The only other area is the skylights that are on the kind of the porch side of the addition. If that way I look at them, that they're virtually on the outside, it's kind of the house is such a beautiful house, and what is being proposed is wonderful. Period. But I would just love to see little things, skylights may potentially not be there, but it's behind the house. It has limited visibility to most people, which is, but it's just, the whole idea is such a wonderful house and structure, making it as compatible in the detail of what is done becomes an important component of what is being done. So I just would love to see little changes in the windows, maybe additional eliminating the skylights, but overall having that wonderful master bath up there and creating a wonderful kitchen and doing what's being proposed is really positive. Thank you.
The windows were also the thing that jumped out to me. So I would echo those sentiments. I know this house really well, actually. I almost bought this house about 10 years ago when it was for sale a few times ago. I love this house. It's beautiful, and it looks like you're really doing great things for it. I totally know what you're talking about with the addition of the kitchen being not the same quality as the rest of the house or even the same aesthetic. I think this is much closer. There's something about the addition shape to me that gives me a little bit more of a farmhouse type feel and aesthetic than the Victorian, elements that I'm seeing in the rest of the house. And I don't know if maybe it's just when I look at the rear elevation photo, I see what looks like literally a barn, and maybe that's what it's doing to my brain. But something to me just doesn't quite feel like Victorian to me. I would be curious to hear what my other HRB members would have to say about that.
Can I say something? The current addition,
Please.
like the current, if you look at the back of the house, it looks exactly like a barn. You look at it and you go,
Okay.
how did they, I mean, really, it looks just like a barn from the back of the current kitchen.
Okay.
You know, with a weird little attic thing that you can, I mean, yeah. So
I didn't remember that from looking at it previously.
Yeah, but okay, I take that.
Well, I appreciate that comment, and I think that we could maybe look at doing a hip roof on that upper portion rather than that gable end back there.
Mm-hmm.
And that might make it blend a little better.
So I'm a little confused because some of the, when we look at the design criteria, seems to me like I would love to have windows that look just like the front. I mean, in my world, I would make the back totally match. You know, I like the rest of the house. So I'm a little confused as to the design criteria. When you look at the review board, you know, they say to make things look different, but not. So anyway.
Yeah, that, I think it's a valid thing to be confused about, because I don't think there is a super consistent way that gets applied across every application. And so I think my advice on that would be to kind of pick your strategy and then kind of justify it in your application and how you want to do it. I think in this case, there's a couple elements of the sense that the old, I think it makes total sense given the structural issues and the foundation issues to rebuild that entire addition on the back. But that addition, I think, is, how old did you say that it was?
I'm guessing the 1910 era.
Right. So I think, that the addition itself could be considered, historic itself, given the age of that, even relative to the rest of the house. So is the strategy to kind of still, even though you're rebuilding a lot of it, maintain that sort of history of the addition that has a little bit of a separate style from the rest of the house? Or do you want to adopt more of the design elements of the original home in terms of the, window proportions and some of the, more ornate trim work and those things that you might echo in the back and make a decision there? I think from a size and massing standpoint, I don't see any issues at all. I think that part is all great. The question is stylistically, how to differentiate the new from the old, and do you want to try to keep kind of that history of the addition or not as a separate sort of narrative or part of the history of this home? I did see kind of when I looked at that rear elevation, and I don't know, Todd probably knows way better than I do what kind of elements it is that gives it that kind of barn look with the lower roofs and the higher attic portion. But I did see that kind of same, I don't know, that was one of my initial thoughts too that I had.
Yeah.
The existing, we should have shown you the existing. I don't have any good pictures to bring up of that. It goes straight up the hillside about 6 feet beyond this. It's very steep and wooded right now. We're trying to clear out some of the hazardous trees to protect the home. Right now, there are 3 different pitches on the backside of that. I think it was actually 2 additions at 2 different times back there. So it's very cobbled together. And it looks like it was built by somebody that built barns.
It has a barn, but also maybe an old schoolhouse look to it. So if you apply, I anticipate either seeing a weather vane on top or a bell. So make that in there. But to what Grant said, you've got 2 different eras. You've got the original house and maybe even 3, Todd, what you were just saying. good way to honor either of those eras. You know, you have a couple of choices to look at, but I think it looks, you know, with the exception of the windows, I agree with Jessica and everybody else, but looks good so far.
Okay. I do think, like Paul said, the skylights are likely to be a controversial issue, or could be, you know, that's something we tend to get a lot of public comments about. And I don't think there's often not a clear consensus on whether they're appropriate or not.
Yeah, I guess after living there, that lot gets no sun, absolutely no direct light for probably 3 months a year. And so anything to bring a little more light, you know, with the overhang, but I think we can just work on that. If that's an issue, we can figure it out.
Well, I think when we come back to the board, we'll have this more refined and we'll have some three-dimensional renderings, and those will not be visible from the street, which is about 15 or 20 feet down from that level. You would have to actually be in the neighbor's yard to actually see those, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would encourage you to, around the, you know, those things, to beef up the application and make sure to provide that kind of, you know, clear evidence to support that, so that it makes it easier for us to make decisions on those items, since those are the exact topics, whether it's visible from where and by whom sort of comes up a lot.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate all your advice, and we will come back to you with a new and better design, I hope.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it looks really fantastic. I'm really excited to see the final. So appreciate you coming to the design advice session. It always makes it a lot easier for us to do it this way, rather than to go straight to an application and try to make a decision the first time we see the concept. So.
I'm really excited for the homeowner. I think this is going to be really lovely. So, you know, I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can stay for the next one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forget that there's another one.
Okay, moving on, we've got just one more item on the agenda this evening, which is Preservation Grant 2201, the Preservation Grant request for wood window repair at 204 Jefferson Street. Do we have a staff report for this one?
Yes, a very brief one. So this is the same property, so we don't need to talk too much about that, but we do have a lovely photo of the front of the house now. So this is a grant request for window repair. For the original wood windows, the 14 windows, I think, are part of your bid.
Yeah.
And
almost everything except that which we might be changing, we've left. There is one strange window in the back of the house that is actually faces in toward the kitchen, like as part of there's a little, like a little mud room. I think it used to be a porch and that was then enclosed. And so it's like that is not included in the bid as of yet, but they're doing such, you know, I think depending on how, like what they're doing, because we've had one window done just as a just to see how it was, and you know, the seals are so much tighter and the noise coming in from the neighborhood is so much less, that perhaps we'll continue.
So there are two bids, one from Green Window Restoration and one from Chosen Wood Windows. If you looked at the two bids, you'll see that it's full window restoration for all of those windows, including all of them on the front of the house, and including, you know, reglazing and repairing defects, repainting, all that. The applicant prefers the green window restoration bid. It's a bit lower. And so the grant request would be for $1,000, which is our typical grant. It's well less than 50% of the project cost. And so there is about, I think, $3,250 worth of unallocated grant funding for the rest of the fiscal year. So the board could award $1,000 grant. I'll show the actual windows, some of them here that we have photos of. So the board could grant the $1,000 if you would like to do that tonight, and that's a reimbursement basis. And if you'd like to, since this is such a costly project, you could allocate additional funding at the end of the year if it's not allocated to any other grant. And so that amount could be whatever you wish, because you're never going to make it to 50% of the project cost here. So just looking for direction from the board on, how much additional you might want to allocate, if any, if it's not used by other applicants.
Didn't we award a grant not too long ago with the same?
We did.
Promise?
Yeah, we awarded a grant. So the request there, the 50% there amounted to total of $1,750. So the board awarded $1,000 with additional $750 possible at the end of the year. And so the remaining funding, if we count that full $1,750, the remaining funding for the year is $3,250.
I would move that we approve 2201 with $1,000 grant, and knowing that that they can come back again, and at least they would know that that's in their hands right now.
I don't think they come back though, Paul. I think we give them a certain amount, like the previous application, and award an additional amount so Kelly can actually cut that check at the end of the year cycle. Is that right, Kelly?
Right. So you could award an additional amount that would be automatically given to them if it is available at the end of the year. They wouldn't have to come back for that. Alternatively, you could just award $1,000 now, and then if they wish to come back for another grant request in the future, they could do that.
And sorry, I feel like I ask the same questions every time, but so the fiscal year ends in the summer, is that right?
Yes, June 30th.
And the projects have to be completed by then.
They do, that's right.
So likely we're not gonna, anything that's not probably started by the end of the first quarter is likely not gonna be done by June 3rd.
It depends, but yeah, that's generally
depends on the scope of the project.
Yeah. And so I would say, given the size of this project being, I think we were close to, with those additional funds, we were close to the 50% amount on that other application, whereas this project is 10x the size of that roughly, or by 10, but I would be supportive of, well, definitely awarding 1,000 now, and then if, let's see, 250, and we're not aware of any other potential applications that are pending or in the pipeline.
Actually, I think I have one coming in March, potentially two.
So what if we approve the 1,000, give them the same, the 750 as we did in the last application, and if there's still extra in the pie, we can invite all the applicants to submit again?
Well, I have a question. I mean, it doesn't prohibit anybody from applying for that money, right? It's only if it's still available.
Right.
Right. So we could just say if nobody else makes a grant, they could have everything, right? I mean,
You could.
because otherwise, does it just go to waste or does it roll over or?
It goes back to the general fund.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
why not just say if it is available, then they can have it, and then it becomes more of a question if something else happens in the meantime, right?
Yep.
So, I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah, I would support, I guess, up to the full amount as possibly available, given that that's not even really hitting, or that, I guess that would only be on the order of 10% of the project. So proportionally, it's not too big in my opinion.
Minus the 750 for the other app, right?
So if we worth 1,000 with the additional potential to get another 1,250, but if we get other applications, we would firmly commit that money to those first, I think is the way it would work, correct?
We would have to, yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so it would be $1,000 guaranteed and an additional, up to an additional $2,250, if not allocated to other projects.
Yes, I would accept that.
Okay. Is that a motion? That's a motion?
That would be,
Okay.
but would be a revision of my motion. What we need is a second.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Stobie.
Aye.
Board Member Ferry.
Aye.
Board Member Ecker.
Aye.
Chair Blythe.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you for the consideration.
Yes, congratulations, I guess, and good luck on the project. It sounds intimidating, but it'll be nice to get it completed. Okay, so that concludes the other business. The last thing would just be communications.
I do have a couple of items. If you're ready.
Yeah, please.
Okay. The Ruth Powers Preservation Award will be awarded in May. I did get an email with a couple of ideas from one of you. So if anyone else has anything, let me know. Otherwise, we will, we'll be in touch over email about that. And I will be submitting the Certified Local Government Grant to the state next week, or actually on Friday this week. What we will likely include in that grant request is some funding for Preservation Month activities, kind of promotional educational programs for Preservation Month for this year and for next year. So this year, the Parks Department, they do the programming for the Ermatinger House, and there, as well as some other historic properties, but they're doing a Preserve Our Past art and poetry contest targeted toward middle schoolers. And their theme this year is going to be the Arch Bridge. It's the 100th anniversary of the Arch Bridge. And so there will be, the contest is focused around that. I think we will be providing some funding to support that contest. We're going to try to get the winning submission, the winners of that get prints made that can then be kind of given away at the Arch Bridge celebration later in the year. There also might be some activities related to the Arch Bridge celebration, as well as bringing in a consultant to the board to discuss historic windows and new window products and how new, I think we always grapple with new construction and what windows are appropriate. And so we did get a consultant to write up, put together some really good information for us, which I'll be sharing with the board. But then we can use this grant funding to actually pay that consultant to come and attend a work session with you and answer questions. And so if that sounds good, we can include that in the request. And I think next year, we might try to be a little bit more ambitious with Preservation Month and have allocate some more funding for more educational activities and maybe some like history pub type lecture events that we will be able to do safely, hopefully next year with no pandemic concerns, fingers crossed. So anything else, if you have any last minute thoughts on that, just contact me this week. Yes.
We have a Kenema Historic Cemetery, Pioneer Cemetery. It's a nonprofit, and it is needs some real help. It needs funds. It's had massive amount of storm damage, trees and everything that need to be removed and cleaned up. And this could be a place where we could help a historic pioneer cemetery nonprofit and how it informs.
Thanks, Paul. There is actually a grant program with the state that's specifically for historic cemeteries. So I'll look and see if Kenema Pioneer Cemetery is eligible for that. And if not, I can find out if it's eligible for the CLG funding.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Paul, would they be eligible for the Metro Enhancement Grant?
Say it again?
The Metro, would you qualify for the Metro Enhancement Grant?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
The Metro Enhancement Grant.
He asked, would it qualify for the Metro Enhancement Grant?
I don't know if it would. It's just a lost child out there at the end of the road. And we have family that are buried there, and it's important because it's a historic pioneer cemetery. And it truly needs, the people that donate their time are wonderful. And, but if we could I would love to see Metro help us, but they have not, Metro Natural Areas has not been they have other priorities. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So anything you could do, figure out. I can give you the names of the people, and I'll email that to you, and you can talk to them direct.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I have for communications.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Do we want to, I think we're kind of getting into the spring break territory next month. I think on the 22nd, I'm supposed to be taking my kids on a vacation. Do we have a quorum for next month, do we think?
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
I may or may not. My wife was in the surgery sometime around then, but won't know for a while.
I should be here. It is my anniversary though, but I'll be here.
We also, I think, plan to go, well, I'll be around on that day, but I think we have a plan to go virtual for March due to just staffing. Lack of staffing that'd be available in person. So there may be a full Zoom meeting in March if we can't get coverage. But we'll let you know about that. And I don't think changing the week of the meeting would clear up the staffing, the shortage. So it sounds like we'll keep the March 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. Well, and if that's it, then we'll go ahead and adjourn at 8:56 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.